Hello, this is Elise Suna, the Education Director at the Willis Institute, and I'm joined again by our board member, Trish Ramsay. And Trish is going to talk to us today about discipline options. I'll give you the floor.
Hi, Elise. Thank you. It's good to continue our conversation because there is so much to say. And the minute we end one conversation, I think of about 1,000 other things that we should talk about. But one of the things that I do want to point out and should have emphasized before, it's important to also recognize good behavior. And the more we can do that, our children really want to please us. Now they test us, obviously, but most of the time, children want to please their parents. So one of the ways to get their attention is with negative behavior. If a child is not being rewarded with positive behavior, or feels that they're not being paid attention to, like if there's more than one child to deal with, they may start misbehaving to get attention. So interestingly enough, some of positive discipline options, one of them is to ignore. And I know that sounds a little counterproductive sometimes, but you have to be, as a parent, using your best judgment, parent or caregiver, using your best judgment about when to use what tools you have. One of them is sometimes to ignore. For example, if a child is saying naughty words, sometimes it's better to ignore them. If you make too much deal about it, they'll go again to see if they get your response. Sometimes you can see them look at you and start to do something, and sometimes just a look will be enough attention, and then ignore the rest of it. So I just want to point that out. There is a little wheel called Positive Discipline Options, and I think we can put that up on the website at some point. But on this wheel is something like ignore, and you have to choose when to use that appropriately. Timeout, which there's a lot of controversy about using timeout, because timeout does not work for every child, and sometimes it can begin as early as 2 if the child understands what's taking place. And it only would be a timeout related to the age of the child. They say 1 minute of timeout per the child's age. The other system of using it sometimes is if the child is taking timeout very, very well, to cut it shorter. Remind them why they were in timeout by having them tell you why they were in timeout, and then giving them a hug and a kiss. It's not supposed to be punishment. Remember we talked about the difference between discipline and punishment. Punishment is to make the child feel bad, and it builds fear and anxiety. And what we really want is to teach. We want to teach our children what we need from them. So timeout, one of the best techniques for timeout is the toy in timeout. They understand that very clearly. If you're marking the wall with crayons, the crayons go in timeout. You don't get to use them anymore, depending on the age of the child. An hour is a very long time for a 2-year-old. An hour is a reasonable amount of time for an 8-year-old. So we have to use our best judgment about what's appropriate for the age of the child we're working with. Setting limits, well, that almost goes without saying, but setting limits is good discipline. Remember we talked about the permissive parent who didn't have any limits, or the uninvolved parent who just wasn't there. Setting limits, like you may watch a video for 5 minutes, and then when that 5 minutes is over, the video is over. Or they may get to watch one episode of Daniel Tiger Neighborhood, sorry. Set a limit that is logical and responsible for the child, because children do have a short attention span. Actually, attention span is supposed to be about, our age plus 2 minutes, but that ends somewhere around 9. So we really all have about an 11-minute time attention span. It's just that we have figured out as adults how to sit still longer. But so it gives you some insight into children's ability to deal with what you're presenting them. Yes, they can watch videos a lot longer because they're so attractive to them. Doesn't mean they should. So just setting limits is also very good discipline. Removal of privilege. I think we've all been grounded or had something like that happen to us as we're growing up. And a removal of a privilege is much more effective with the older child than it is the younger child, because the younger child may not fully comprehend that removal. They'll just be frustrated by it, perhaps. But you'd be surprised. They do begin to understand. And if there's a certain behavior you're wanting to correct, again, I have to use my own personal reference. My one grandson has a very bad habit of twisting on his eyelid, which is driving me as a grandmother very crazy. And even though we have attempted to ignore it, we use that ignore option, I found that if I was sitting with him watching something on TV, a child's program on TV, I said to him, we don't twist our eye while we're watching whatever the show was, Sesame Street or Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. And he understands that. So I turn off the TV if he starts to do it. But now, as he's gotten a little bit older, every month he's getting older, I just put my hand out for him, and he knows to put that hand in my hand. And we hold hands while we watch the show for a certain time limit, rather than him twisting his eyes. So there are many ways. You have to use all the tools that are being given to you to figure out how it works. We talked last time about logical consequences and natural consequences. I think this is a parent caregiver's best friend. Mm-hmm. If we're teaching logic, for one thing, children began to see life in a more logical system. And there are natural consequences, which kind of goes around. I've always liked the serenity prayer. And without talking about religion, we can talk about having some serenity, understanding what things you can control and what things you cannot control. Mm-hmm. And having some wisdom about knowing what that difference is. And you cannot control a 2-year-old in a temper tantrum, but you can control yourself. And I think we'll talk a little bit about anger again in a minute, but just trying to think of these things in the most appropriate terms for us as grown-ups, because some of this information is new, some of it's a reminder, bubbling it up to the surface again to, oh yeah, I got to try that. And it takes practice, practice, practice. As I said before, many of us are raised in the land of no and don't. And trying to change our language and our approach, and no spanking, no hitting, no demeaning, no emotional and verbal abuse of our children, it's very difficult. And I appreciate that. But the better we do it, the results show. And parents come back to us all the time saying, oh, my child is behaving so much better. Well, what they often takes a while for them to understand is they're also behaving better. When we do a better job of parenting, our children do behave better. Natural and logical, what's the other one? Oh, give choices. Sometimes it's called the faux choice. Do you want to wear your red shorts or your green shorts? Do you want your pink blouse or your purple blouse? Do you want to play with your doll or your tiger? I mean, whatever the choice is, we're helping our children learn how to make choices and to listen to their internal mechanism that says, oh, this is what I want today. And we don't always get what we want, but when we can help them develop what they want. For example, if a friend is coming over to play, someday we hope that will happen again. If a friend is coming over to play, and this can be with even very young children, as young as 2, if there is a really special toy that they love, give them the choice to put it away and keep it safe, and then share their other toys. Because as much as we want our children to be loving and giving, we all have something we don't want to share. And I think that's a personal right. But you can't pull out that toy and show it and say, well, you can't play with it. We're teaching them, again, that's setting limits. We're teaching them a way to have some limits for their own property, but also to be generous with their other property. The other one that I really, really promote, especially the younger the child, the faster this works. And anybody dealing with babies will know this. Distraction and attraction. If you can distract the younger child or the baby or the toddler from what they're doing incorrectly or what we see as wrong or dangerous, and attract them to something else, that is such a win-win situation. And again, these are tools at a parent's disposal, at a caregiver's disposal. Bring these things to the front of your mind. If I can attract you away from the AC plug and attract you over here to a book or to another toy, or trading toys with a younger child. The older child wants what the younger child does. But with the younger child, you can probably distract them with another toy, attract them to another toy. You distract and detract. And then it will be about sharing, because sharing and conflict are huge issues when there's multiple children involved, and I understand this. So I want to point out, I talked about before, if there's an accident or something breaks or something drops or something spills, always ask, are you okay? Because we want to implicitly and explicitly tell the child, you're more important than anything else going on. Well, when it comes to sorting out which child do I go to, if you have two children crying, your children, and one is young, like an infant versus a toddler, it's probably a good idea, as long as the infant is safe and you know the infant is safe and just unhappy, to go check on the toddler first, because the toddler will remember. The baby maybe not remember quite so, but you can take care of one and then go to the other. And these are just little techniques and tricks and things that I try to remember. Again, I want to end with talking about discipline, to remember to praise good behavior. Think about raise with praise. It's not biblical, it's reality. Raise with praise. The more we can tell our child, I like the way you share your toys. I like the way you put that away when mommy asks you to. I like that you're making me pretend coffee and I'm drinking pretend coffee. And these are the things that the child then will try to get your attention with positive behaviors.
And I really like that when you tie that into that serenity prayer. And I think for those who don't know it, it's, so God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And I think
Right.
now that's wonderful in parenting, and that's just wonderful right now, is what we're trying to do to get through this, is changing what we can and accepting what we can't. And
Exactly.
know that difference to help us be at peace and okay.
Really great comparison. And again, with all respect to those that may not choose to pray to God or to a higher power, it is still simply can start with grant me, which is using your own internal power or yourself as your higher power. And I do appreciate that. Okay, just want to also go back a little bit. We talked about different parenting styles. I want to remind parents that, and caregivers, that we often parent the way we were parented. But we did not grow up in the world that exists today. I don't know about you at least, but there were no computers in my life for a long time. Color TV was an innovation when I was young. There's nobody who is an adult right now that grew up in today's world. And so we're all adapting to today's world. Zoom is something I just learned about, a couple of weeks ago. So we're all adapting to this new world, and our children are having to adapt too. And I think it's important that we share with our kids that we're learning things, that we don't stay in one place. And if you're doing what your parents always did, well, my parents always did it this way, it will not serve you well this year. It will not serve you well next year, because things are very different. And now when you think about it, having our children behave in such a way, we do have to explain to them about why we have to wear a mask. We do have to explain to them why we're not in school. Now, my 2.5-year-old grandson, he just knows he comes to my house a lot now, and that we're playing games and playing make-believe and doing things. So he's missing school, he's missing social skills, and there's going to be a catch-up phase. But as parents, as parenting caregivers, we have the option to be very helpful. And one of the things I wanted to share with you is we talked briefly about anger, because anger is such a natural emotion for us. And you talked about we really need some peace and serenity now. And anger is maybe a little closer to the surface in some people than others, but it's always there. And it's not a bad emotion. It just gets a bad rap because of what we do with it. We do some unkind, bad things when we're angry. And I talked about counting to 10, taking time to calm ourselves down. So I wanted to tell you, as part of the discipline options, there might be time a parent needs to go on timeout for themselves. And again, depending on the age of your child, you cannot leave a 2-year-old by themselves. But you might move to another room for a brief moment. I know with the older children, I once said, Mommy needs a timeout, I've had it. And I think that is verbalizing our emotion, which we need to help our children learn to do, and setting an example. That everybody has a limit. We talk about setting limits. We have to know our limits. We have to figure out what we can and can't cope with. And as much as we know this too will pass, we don't know how it's going to pass. We don't know when it's going to pass. And we don't know what it's going to be like when we get to the other side of when it does pass. So anger is physical, cognitive, meaning the way we think, and it's our behavior. And the only one that we really can control is being sure that we're controlling our behavior by controlling our thinking. And you know that Dr. Meichenbaum is one of the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is a well-recognized form of therapy because it works. It helps people think and rethink and reframe and figure out what's the best way to do things. So I have this little drawing. Actually, it's not going to show well, I don't think. There's something called a feeling wheel. A feeling wheel helping kids to see a little picture of what it would feel like. And a mother or father or a caregiver can actually draw one. Take a paper plate and draw a happy face, a sad face, a scared face, a frustrated face, a sad face, and embarrassed maybe. You can make a little red face and help, and the child can point to these things and say maybe how they're feeling, and that will help them. And then you're giving them the vocabulary for it. We know that helping children build vocabulary at a very early age helps them not only in their relationships with other children, but also in their ability to learn to read. So everything is entwined and layered upon layer. So again, the feelings wheel would help younger children express feelings. Parents can express their feelings in words that their children can understand, like, Mommy's not very happy right now. I feel sad, or I feel angry inside, so I need to deep breathe. And the children's programs that we talked about earlier that are good for young children, Sesame Street, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, Baby First TV, they all have little segments that talk about taking a deep breath and waiting a minute to help get yourself under control and to no longer be angry. So I'm tying being angry, discipline, and punishment all together, because the more we can think of those things as a complex circle, the better we'll be doing to sort them out for ourselves.
Wonderful. Yes, and absolutely that really all those tools to teach self-regulation and that ability for a child to regulate and be okay and get through, and for parents too.
Well, I love the way you said that, because right now there's an entire generation learning so many new things about self-regulation that I believe will make them stronger in the end. And we're all working hard right now to stay safe and healthy. So thanks again for having me. And I think next time we'll talk a little bit more about violence, just to be sure everybody knows what it is.
Perfect.
Okay, bye-bye.